Gary, this is such an honor to have a chance to speak with you because your music has been a big part of my life growing up here in Toronto. When I think about your music, I think about my 1985 Camaro that I called Bluebird that had the T-bar and blaring your music down the streets of Yonge Street. And you knew you got the attention of people around you. People would dance on the street. I mean, back in the day, that's the way it was. That's what your music did for people, and that's what your music did for me. So this is a definite honor to have a chance to speak with you, my friend.
Well, thank you. I'm actually very proud. Thank you very much.
I mean, when you think about, we're going to be talking about this new music that you have, and congratulations on that. But I just want to talk very quickly. When you think about what you've contributed to the music, the history of music, all your formations, and how you were able to, in your way, taking pop, rock, techno, disco, funk, all these different genres, punk, and make it into your own sound that became universal. Where if you went to a punk club, they were playing your music. If you went to an R&B club, they were playing your music. If you went to sort of like a pop disco place, they were playing your music. You, my friend, universally loved.
Well, that's amazing. Truthfully, man, I'm largely unaware of I mean, what I do in a way is you drop a stone into a pond, and then the ripples go out from that. But when all that's happening, I'm looking back for the next rock to drop. Do you know what I mean? And that would be the next album, and so I'm very unaware of the effect that it has. I'm not really that bothered, to be truthful. I'm more interested in where I'm going, what I'm going to do next. Listening always, looking always. Very much like a sponge, in a way. I think most creative people are, to be truthful. It's not just me. We are very sponge-like in that we soak up everything that's around us. And I don't just mean music. That's a very small part of the influence that goes in. But oh God, anything, conversations, a book you might be reading, a TV show, a movie, an experience out on the road, an experience on tour, whatever it might be. Every day the world is pouring experiences on top of you, into you. And if you're sponge like, then you're actually soaking on it. They're not kind of just bouncing off and you're blissfully running through it. You're kind of soaking all this stuff in. And there comes a point every once in a while, usually when you're going to start an album, probably, you just squeeze it and it all just starts pouring back out again. Hopefully, it's mixed with a whole load of your own ideas and it's been turned into something very new. And that's what you put out. You make another rock, you drop it in the pond, out go the ripples, and you start again. And that's pretty much the way I've always seen it. When I've done something and it's gone out, I'm very, very interested in it for that week or two. I really am. And it's, I'm working really hard to try to help it do as much as it can do. And then you get into the touring, and that's just a different world. Normally, at the moment, it's a bit tricky, but normally, and that's just an entirely different thing altogether. I love touring because, in a way, there's very little pressure with touring. There's a huge amount of pressure making the records, lots of worries and anxieties, and my confidence is fragile at the best of times, and it really struggles making a record. And it's getting worse. Each one is a little bit harder than the one before. But when you get to touring, you're kind of just along for the ride in a way. You just get on the bus and away you go, and it's an awful lot of fun. But I don't really follow what happens. I don't really see where the album is effective, who's talking about it, and I definitely don't look back very, very far at all even when I do look back. So I found out, for example, that some of the songs from the Pleasure Principle album, one that Cars came from, they were used in the early sort of hip hop days in those tenement parties and all that sort of thing. But I found that out about 20 odd years after it happened. I had no idea that was going on. I read a Malcolm McLaren interview, I think, and he mentioned it. And then I met up with African Bambata very briefly, but for an interesting afternoon, and he talked about it. And I had no idea. I was blown away by that. Man, what such how cool a thing is that? And but I just my focus is always ahead. Always. My wife says that I'm a glass half empty kind of person, because I'm not able to live in the moment. The current album's just done quite well, and she said, can't you just sit back and enjoy the next few weeks of just appreciating what it's done. He said, it's just that it'll make you happy. I said, yeah, but yeah, I now got to do another one. There's another album coming. This doesn't end. You just keep on going, and as soon as something is done, then I automatically just click to the next thing that's coming. So it's not that I'm a glass half empty. It's just that half the glass got out early and is running ahead of me, and the other half is still sitting there, which looks like it's half empty, but it really isn't. I'm always just going to chucking it ahead, I suppose, because that's my interest. My interest in electronic music, in music in general, in life in general, really, is to be fascinated and excited about what's coming, and try to shape it as much as you can. And that's really my thing. So that's what I mean. So it's a very long, waffly answer, but when these ripples go out for anything that I might do, I'm already looking the other way.
But when you talk about the glass being half filled, inside that glass, you, Prince, David Bowie do this very well. You can talk about the struggles of the world in music and still have us dancing during that message. How do you guys do this?
Well, I don't think a heavy message needs to be particularly depressing. There is a way of wrapping it in something that's entertaining. And there's plenty of people that can do that. Really, you go to see some hard-hitting films, hard-hitting movies, but you're still entertained. But what you want at the end of that, you want people to be walking out of that movie, presumably, having been entertained and enjoyed the experience, but thinking. You're thinking about what was said and the message that was given on the film. Maybe having your eyes opened to a way of looking at a particular problem or an issue that maybe you hadn't thought of before. And I think music does much the same thing, or can do, depending on how it's delivered. That's certainly what, in my own small way, I tried to do with the new album, for example, with Intruder. So I don't think people talk about dystopian themes, and as if it's all sort of negative, but it isn't. Dystopia can be a warning more than a statement about how terrible things are. It can be a warning to say it's going to be terrible if you don't change what's going on now. That's still dystopian. And so I think I dwell in that more, perhaps, sort of a little warning sign as to, if you keep going this way, then look what's around the corner, that sort of thing. So it can still be entertaining, it can still be exciting, but you do want people to, you want to leave a thought in people's minds, hopefully several, but one would do.
I want to talk just a little bit about back in the day before we get into this album, because of course the album is what's most important. But the love of music for you, where did that begin for you? Because we all always feel that when it came to the British really understood American R&B, American soul roots and things like that. Where was it for you?
I honestly believe that I was a fairly latecomer to loving music in terms of wanting to make it. When I was younger, very young, about 4 or 5 years old, I saw a guitar player on TV, and I was fascinated by the guitar, not the music. But I was drawn into music because of it. The guitar was the first time I seen an electric guitar. You could plug it in, it had dials on it, some switches. I thought that was the coolest thing ever. And so I got into music. I got fascinated by music because of the technology that made the sounds. Later on, many years later, when my parents bought me my first electric guitar of my own, um, I learned the basic chords. I did that, but I wasn't really that interested in becoming a great guitar player. I would spend as much time putting the guitar on the stand, plugging it into some pedals, and then just hitting it, and then just messing about with the noises. I was interested in sound, noises. That was my fascination. So I never learnt musical scales. I never learnt many chords. Even on the piano now, I still, you said to me, play a G chord on the piano. Not a clue. Not a clue. I've got no idea. I know what G note is, but that's as far as my musicality goes. I'm an awful musician. I'm average at best, and I wouldn't even come close to average. But I can play well enough to write songs, and my songs are very simple. Any average quality musician could pick up any of my songs and play them with great ease. They're not difficult. But my fascination with noises and sounds married to this melodic sort of sensibility that I've got. Well, you don't need to be a great player for that. You can come up with the most beautiful tunes. You don't have to be a brilliant player for that. A tune is a fairly simple thing. It's not. It's far less than that, and that's I think what I bring to the table. I'm not a great player. I'm certainly not a great singer. My musical skills are, as I say, average at best. But I do have a sensibility for melody, and I do have a fascination for sound, which I've always had, and I think that's why I was drawn to electronic music, because with that you're able to explore both of those things very, very, very easily.
The European invasion, as I like to call it, that happened during the 80s, where a lot of European acts were coming to North America and really meshing in their sound. When you came along, it was one of those, again, bright lights, because as you said, you brought in that sort of synth sound with your voice, your music. It was space age, very much so. What do you think, though, with that sound that you did, that really made you stand out? Because there were other acts that were sort of doing the same thing, but especially with Cars,
Mhm.
major, major hit.
It's difficult to pin down why something works so well and something else doesn't. I mean, there were plenty of songs around that I thought were better than Cars that didn't do as well, haven't done as well over the years. So it's really hard for me to say, and it sounds very braggy as soon as you start trying to justify why it did well and something else didn't. But it's a fairly unusual song in that it's almost instrumental. There's no chorus in it. It hits in a very strange way. There's a story to that, actually. I mean, the song starts with that little wobbly noise, and then it's in, and it just screams as soon as it comes in. I think it's quite a striking intro for a song. It absolutely, the huge groove and the big strings, and it just hits you in the face as soon as it starts. So I think it captivates you almost immediately. But it really is, it's unusual. It doesn't really have a chorus. What hit songs don't have a chorus? Not many. It's a bit of a requirement as a rule. The chorus is the thing that carries it, and you're always being told, make sure you get the chorus in really, really quick if it's going to go on radio. And Cars doesn't have one. So, and then the singing's all over. And I think in about the first 60 seconds, there's no more singing after that. Two short verses in two halves. And then it's an instrumental from the rest of it on. It's always a nightmare to do on television because, I'm standing there at the front with a microphone and I sing it. And now the singing finishes. And I think, now I've got another 2.5 minutes to just try and look interesting with nothing to do. I hated it. I hated doing it on television. It was a nightmare. But I don't know. Maybe that was it. Maybe the way it starts, the groove of it is quite cool, I think. It's unusual structure. I don't know if people would even been aware of that to have thought that was a good thing or not. I don't know. I mean, it has a sound and it had an energy to it, which nothing else had. at the time. Even other people doing electronic music were doing it in a different way to the way cars approached electronic music. In fact, much of the album that it came from had a similar kind of theme running through it, with the big strings and the very sort of anthemic kind of orchestral type lines running through it. Um, I don't know. I think it just was the right thing at the right time. And that was luck, not any judgment or any strategy or scheming on my part. I just made some music that I loved and I thought sounded really cool, and I was really excited by it. And I was having such a good time with it, trying to learn all about synthesizers. And I mean, I discovered electronic music at the end of '78. By early '79, I was #1 in Britain. By mid to late '79, I was big everywhere. So within less than a year of finding synthesizers at all, having never even seen a real one before, I had 3 albums and I was this synthesizer kingpin, and still didn't know much about them. I'd made 3 albums and I still didn't even own a synthesizer. And I was doing interviews to like technology magazines, and they're asking me all these questions about filters and envelopes and God knows contour and things. And they thinking I knew all about it. I don't know what you're talking about. So because I didn't know. The amount of time that I spent with a synthesizer could be measured in hours, even though I'd made 3 albums of the stuff, with the things, because I couldn't afford to buy one. We would rent them in for like 3-hour blocks or 2-hour blocks, to try to get everything done as quickly as you could in those few hours you had it, and then it would have to go away again because you couldn't afford to have it for any longer. So I was an amateur at best, which is weird because I'm number 1 in some charts, and I'm this synthesizer. I'm the man. I'm this this sort of pioneering synthesizer person, and I'm having to answer all these questions about technology. And I was probably the least knowledgeable of anybody could spoke to. I was just loving it, absolutely loved it. They gave me everything that I wanted. People talk about electronic music as being, certainly back in the day anyway, as being cold and unfeeling and so on. And maybe there was some truth in that, but if there was some truth in that, it was really down to sort of my inability to do better with it, because the machines themselves are incredibly capable. I think more than any other instrument, you play a piano, it sounds like a piano, and you can play some beautiful, heart-wrenching things with a piano. It's an amazing instrument. I love it. Same with the guitar, same with many instruments. But they all sound the way they sound. A guitar sounds like a guitar. You can plug it into some pedals, but it's still a guitar, and piano is piano, blah, 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 on it goes. But a synthesizer can do more than that. A piano, you can play your melody and it will sound like a piano playing that melody. With a synthesizer, you can change the nature of the very sound itself. So you can not only play in the melody that has all of the emotion that you want it to have, but you can control the very sound itself that then projects that melody out. There is nothing else does that. So in that sense, a synthesizer that's well controlled is the most, in a way, the most emotional instrument of all, because nothing else gives you the ability to shape the very sound itself that you listen to. Only synthesizers do.
Absolutely agree with you. And it made us dance. And that's the important thing. It made us dance. You've done, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of concerts. I'm just curious, do you remember performing in Toronto back in the day?
I do, actually. In fact, we rehearsed in Toronto for my very first ever North American tour. I can't remember the name of the theatre now. I used to, actually. Oh, that's a shame. Anyway, I did. We did about a week's rehearsal, as I remember, in Toronto, and that's where I first met Nash the Slash in Toronto. We was rehearsing. We had a day or two to go before the tour started, and we had a support band lined up already, and we just went out just to have a break, and me and the band and some of the crew, and we're walking past a nightclub and just heard this amazing music coming out. So we went in just to check it out. And that's when I first saw Nash the Slash with the whole bandage thing and the top hat. And I just thought he was just amazing. I've never seen anything so original and so different and so brilliantly done. And so I said to him, I spoke to him afterwards and said, look, we're just about to go out on tour. I said, I've got a support band, but I'll gladly lose them if you want to do it. So I actually felt really bad about that, because it must have been pretty disappointing for them. But Nash was so good and so different and so perfect for what I was trying to do. As a package, I thought we were something very different to what was around at the time. And I was really grateful that he did it at such short notice. I think the next day he turned up with his case and his top hat and his mandolin, got on the bus with us, and away we went. And I absolutely loved it. I loved it. He was such a cool man. I really liked him.
Oh my goodness. And now I got to go back and watch his videos again, because it's been so long. And yeah, you're right. He was such an original and such a classic. You, of course, even though, the music world would change over the years, you never stopped making music. You continued making music.
Yeah. But there was a long period of it not doing very well. Very long period of it not doing very well. Things started well for me at the beginning, but no, not for too long, and then it started to drop away a little bit. And by the end of the 80s, early 90s, certainly by 92 anyway, I was pretty much dead and buried as far as career was concerned. Records weren't selling. I didn't have a record deal. I had massive debts. They were trying to repossess my house. It was pretty grim, actually. But some of that, a great deal of that, I think was my own fault. I think I became so obsessed about trying to save the career and writing songs based on other people's advice, which is a terrible thing to do, really. My songwriting went downhill. My vision, if you like, went with it. I didn't deserve to be there. I really don't. There was a lot of bad luck and a lot of unfortunate decisions. So it's not all my fault, but I do shoulder the bulk of the blame for it going down the way it did. But much as I shoulder the credit for it coming back up again, that was me as well. So I'm not trying to be sort of falsely humble or anything. I made some real big mistakes. I didn't react to the setbacks in the correct way, so I made more mistakes, and things went from bad to worse, really. But then I learned my lesson, and I got myself sorted out around about 93, 94. Made an album called Sacrifice in 94, which was a definite step in the right direction, and that gave me it gave me the vision back again. The creativity all started to flow again, and the imagination was there. And I've been happy ever since. Everything I've done since 94. In fact, everything I've done since 94 has done better than the thing before. Everyone, which is becoming a problem now because there's not much further to go in some places. And that brings a pressure of its own, to try to maintain that new level. But it's been good, so my career has kind of got this great, fantastic peak at the beginning, and then it drops right down to almost nothing, and then it's a really, really gentle climb for the next 30 odd years, kind of where I am now. And I'm still trying, obviously, to do better, because I've still got a way to go in certain places. But the thing is, from 94 onwards, despite there being setbacks and disappointments, I've enjoyed it very much. And I've loved making music, and I've really enjoyed being in a band, and I've loved touring. So everything about why you got into it in the first place has been there. But for a lot of the 80s and the early part of the 90s, it really wasn't there. I sort of fell out in love with it, but very much, actually. Didn't realize it at the time. It was only when you sort of rediscover your love of music again that you realize that you hadn't had it for quite some time. It become like a job, like a routine that you would get into. So it's been a funny career in a way. I've been around a long time, but for a lot of it, not so you'd notice, but I have. But I've always been there, and I think I try to. I talk to lots of people about this, and say that if being successful is all that matters to you, then you're gonna have a very unpleasant and unfortunate kind of life, really, unless you're incredibly lucky. But if you just love making music, if you can hang on to that, if music can be a hobby that you just coincidentally make a living from, then in a way, it's easier to ride out the ups and the downs of it because you're still loving doing what you're doing. Sometimes it's successful, sometimes it isn't, but you just love doing it anyway. You know, if you wasn't being paid for it, if it wasn't your living, you would still do it. You would come home from work, go out to your little home studio and tinker away with your music the way so many people do, which is a great thing. Um, I've sort of done that really. You know, I had those few years where my head wasn't right, but for the most part, I've remembered success should be the cherry on the top of the cake. You know, the last little bit. You know, being in a band, doing this, making music your life, whether you're successful or not, that's the cake. You know, that's almost everything. You know, if you're just lucky enough to have a bit of success, we just drop that cherry on the top and put some icing on it. You know, because that's the last little frilliness. You know, if you enjoy just waking up in the morning and loving the fact that you're in a band and you know records aren't doing great, but what a life anyway. You know, just you know, it's and I think hanging on to that realization is really important to keep you together.
Again, absolutely agree with you because I'm sitting here and I'm talking to you and I'm listening to everything you're saying, and I'm also thinking to myself, man, if I can go into a time machine and tell young me listening to your music back then and being able to say you will be able to have a conversation with him, but it's going to be something called Zoom, I'd be going, who's this weirdo? Get him away from me. Help, police. So again, this is, oh my God, this is so much fun. But even so much fun adding to all this, you have a new album. The legacy continues. For folks who don't know what that album is, sir, please tell me the name of the album and how does this album represent you at this point in your career?
Well, the album's called Intruder, and the idea behind it is to give a voice to the planet. If the planet could speak, if Earth could speak about the way it feels at the minute, about what we're doing to it, about its hopes for its own survival, you know, what would it say if it could speak? And that's what I tried to do with Intruder. So Intruder, um, it talks about how the Earth must feel a sense of betrayal from us. At one point, we would have been the golden child as we first crawled our way out of the ocean and started to stand upright, you know, and become what we become now. And it gave us everything that we could ever need. And we just kept taking more and expanding and like an infestation. And so that golden child nurturing favorite son kind of attitude that it had towards us soured somewhat, and we became a disappointment, and the earth became disillusioned, and then as it went on it became angry, and then there come a point when it saw us not as a golden child anymore but as a virus, as an enemy almost, and it realized that it would have to fight back, and for it to survive, for nature as a system to survive, for all of its brutality. I mean, nature is an incredibly brutal system. Everything kind of eats everything else. You know, nature's answer to population control is to invent something else with even sharper teeth and eat the first thing. It's pretty fucking horrible, actually, you know, but it works. It works. It has a brutal harmony to it. And for all of its savagery, it does work. Until you put people, you introduce people, human beings into it, and it all starts to fall apart. So you have mass extinctions, you have temperature rises, all the things that we're seeing happening now before our very eyes. And so the frustration that the earth must feel, you know, the hurt, and you know, let's say the betrayal and the disappointment and the anger must be enormous, should it be able to feel anything at all. And I just wanted to write about that. I mean, I wanted to, the last album, the previous album, had a climate change theme to it, but it was more of science fiction looking to the future as what humanity would become should the global apocalypse happen in 30 years, whatever. So it was interesting, but it took a, you know, what will people become type view to it. It wasn't looking at climate change itself as such. So I wanted to stay connected with a climate change theme with this one, with Intruder, but I really didn't know quite how to go about it. I didn't want it to be a science manual set to music. The oceans have gone up 1 inch and the ice cap has melted a billion times. I didn't want all facts and figures and all that sort of thing. I thought that'd be really boring. And I didn't know what to do. And then my youngest daughter, Echo, she wrote a poem about 2 years back called Earth, which is pretty much what Intruder's about. It was this planet, our planet, talking to the other planets, actually, talking about how horrible people were and all the terrible things that we were doing, and how sad it was. And I just thought that's it. That's the angle for the album, because that's such a beautiful idea, to give a voice to the planet, which is what she had done. And so I just stole it, really, and sort of broadened it out somewhat and tried to draw parallels with certain other things and highlight contradictions where I saw them, but always from the point of view of the planet. So that there's a song called Saints and Liars, for example. Saints and Liars looks at the what I see as a contradiction, in that you have huge amounts of people that are genuinely religious and believe in a god, various gods, but they believe in them, and yet I see no real evidence of any of that. In fact, I see anything but evidence for that sort of thing. But they make this leap of faith willingly with no evidence. And fair enough. I don't. That's their right. But on the other hand, you have climate change, for which there is a mountain of evidence. It's pretty much punching you in the face. There's so much evidence for it, and yet many of these same people will not believe that. And this willingness to believe in the unbelievable, and unwillingness to believe in the evident, the evidence is standing right there, is a very weird thing. It's shocking for someone that thinks the way I think. And so if you put that into the planet's point of view, that must be frustrating beyond belief, and that must take away, pretty much any bit of optimism that you might have that things are going to get sorted out. And so that need to fight back is very strong. There's a song called I Am Screaming on the album. Now, I believe that the various things that are happening at the moment are very clear signs that the earth is struggling, almost like it's in some sort of agony, and it's twisting and turning, and volcanoes and earthquakes, and the sea going up and ice caps melting, and the hurricane, the phenomenal sort of degree of hurricanes that we're having now, and all the various freaky weather that's going on. And these to me are signs of the earth screaming in a way a planet would scream. It doesn't have a voice, but if it did. So I wanted to write about that, because it seems to be that it's largely being ignored by, vast amounts of people, and yet to me it seems very clear, that that's what's happening, and the science would say that that's what's happening as well. So that's really, I'm sorry, I'm waffling again, but that's really what the album is about, and it's trying to make people think about the planet in a slightly different way. It's trying to create a feeling of sympathy for the planet and a recognition of the greed that we exhibit, and the ruthlessness that we exhibit towards it, and this total lack of care or gratitude for what it's done for us, to just use it and abuse it till it runs out, really. And that the self-defeating nature of that, if the planet suffers, and ultimately we suffer, the stupidity of that, the ignorance of that, again, is, it's shocking, really. But anyway, so that's it. I understand that my voice is very, very small, and I understand that the impact that Intruder will make on the world at large is very, very small. But I write songs for a living. So if you're going to write songs for a living, why not write about something you really care about? And so that's what I'm doing. And if I can convince 100 people to think differently, it would have been worthwhile.
You've always had a message. You've always had a voice. I know the message and voice I've always listened to, which is why I love this album. I've always loved everything that you've done, and looking forward to the continuous of everything that you do in the future. My friend, as we wrap this up, again, I want to say thank you so much for the music that you have given me and so many other fans as a snapshot of their lives through your music, and the snapshot that you've shown through your music to what's going on in the world. thank you so much for this album, and just thank you so much for the music that you've done over the years.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Grateful for the experience.